the decision to retire from active duty with the company, and he moved to Aspen, where he has been an important part of Aspen through the years, and a great friend of the community there, and has done many things over there, which I'm hopeful he'll tell us about. The company Telluride just recently published this book, and it's called The First 40 Years. And they sent it to me so that I could read up, and the first chapter is entitled Rebel with a Cause. And Nick and I have been kicking around different ways to characterize some of this, but I think the book did a pretty good job. I want to read some stuff to you about what I have learned that Nick has done. His wife Maggie, who for a couple of reasons couldn't come down today, but you know, we're filming all this, so I don't know if you knew that, but we're going to have films of this, and I swear this. And after living in Telluride for 30 years, I had to admit to him that I had never seen or touched tellurium, which seemed a little odd. But Nick found something, and we have it implanted here in the base.
Thank you very much. And I got it, of course, at eBay. Telluride usually joined forces with gold. Then the miners found it looked pretty crummy, kind of grubby looking, and I even found some of that on eBay. Then when they melted it with a torch, horrible fumes came off. Miners died left and right, and had a little lump of gold left. So the town is named for gold Telluride. I have a hunch there was very little found here. And like Aspen, most of the money, like the internet, most of the money was made on Wall Street promoting gold Telluride discovered in Colorado. And there was about an ounce or two discovered. Somebody made a .com promotion out of it. But nonetheless, John gets some tellurium. Okay. Now, I didn't quite know what to talk about, but I decided to do a silly thing, since I'm not as much of a celebrity as, although it may be an ex-celebrity. I thought I'd talk a little about me and what I've done. And then maybe from that you might deduce, those of you that are not in the same, let's say, club that I'm in, you'll understand a little what drives these crazy inventor types, and it's not as simple as most people think. I was certainly never driven, not for 2 seconds, to get rich. Although I must admit, one of the adventures is that I ran the engineering department of a gold mine for a while. But it really, anyway, that'll come up. Perhaps the most interesting things I did, actually, were not Telluride, where I made a lot of dough and ran a company, and it was 3,000 people, 2,000 people when I left. And I built a religion there that has lasted all these 30 years. And the company's doing fine. Really still operating on never mind product ideas, it operates on the same human religions that we built, about how to treat people, which is very important in a company. But perhaps the even more interesting is what happened, forgive me, is I wrote a list of what I'd done, because I'd never done this before. I've never done this before. Holy moly, it's 4 pages, it's too much. But it turns out it is possible to be involved in a heck of a lot more things than your one main career. When I went to Transitron, I was fresh out of school. I'd worked for lovely General Electric, which was infinitely secure. You could do no wrong except some immoral wrong, but other than that, you had security. It was a different time. You worked for Mom, and Mom took care of you. And a guy bumped into me at a trade show, and he grabbed me and he said, "Come work for me, and we'll build semiconductors." And I said, just a flash of an instinct, I said, okay. I shook his hand right there at the airport, and we said, all right. His name was Dave Bacalar. And he and his brother financed and were the only public figures known in this company which actually made more money than Henry Ford ever made in the same length of time. We went public. We were on the front cover of Fortune magazine. All of us peons were in the back of Fortune magazine, and we were known as the company with the gold whisker. The company with the gold whisker way outstripped anything almost as unreasonable as the dot-coms. We were sold for far too much. We weren't worth it at all. And the stock market was just totally in love with us because we were making semiconductors. What the heck is that? So I had a lot of fun back at that very early stage, and I don't think I was 25. I had the fun of going to IBM and lecturing them strongly on why transistors would replace vacuum tubes. And I was told that was nonsense, malarkey. I was laughed out of the room, and IBM took 5 years longer than that moment to solder their first transistor into a computer.
Must have been a really bad lecture.
I was so enthusiastic, I probably sold it just like .coms. As if I rushed into this audience, got a new .com for you, man. It was probably comparable to that. But the reason I knew it was that I had measured transistors. I wasn't a marketing guy. I had measured the voltage current curves, and I thought, holy shit, this thing switches. I'm telling you, it makes a tube look sick when it comes to turning on. And it turns off rather badly. They were only thought of for hearing aids and telephones. I'm serious, that's what they were for. So that was fun, and I rode that whole wave through, and I was essentially selling a lot of stuff too. But in the process, I built all the machinery with which we made the transistors and tested them. And that machinery is very important. Nobody makes them by hand, especially nowadays. So it came time to leave, and I did invent, it's probably the most important thing I ever did, but it never quite came out right. I did invent the binister, not the dinosaur. And the binister isn't known by that name, but it was the predecessor of the silicon control rectifier, and I have a little tale about that later, fascinating. But the control rectifier is a house light dimmer. That light there would be dimmed by one almost surely. Very hard to make at the time. It was a PNPN, and we didn't know how to do that. So I had a hard time making them, but I sure wanted them. And that leads to something that was a very interesting experience, more generalized. I'm an engineer, MIT, trained and think and operate and still work the same way. The room has got lots of MIT engineers in it. And I think about making things happen, solving problems by finding a solution and making it happen. Now, the reason the transistor so intrigued me, and the reason the binister so intrigued me, is that you can go to Telluride's mountains, and you can take a jackhammer, and you can spend the rest of your life, and you will not find a transistor. Yet that mountain's made of silicon. Nature never made a transistor. Nature has made a nuclear pile in Africa somewhere. There was enough uranium that got hot, and they got scared. Don't blame them. But nature never did these things. I'm trained to take nature and make her do what we want her to do. That's pretty cruel, but it's very exciting. So that's why I really am not in tune with the idea that we must drop technology, destroy all the thinking that we do, wait for nature to take care of us. I sort of think we have to take care of ourselves. And that binister and those transistors, perfect example of it. The physicists didn't help me much. We had tons of physicists. They all wanted to do research and study the nature of the PN junction. And I said, screw it, let's go make a transistor that does the following things. So the time came to leave, probably because the people who owned that company gave none of it to the employees. They had never even thought of that. And they made an absolute fortune, and we were actually paid about 2/3 the going wage for engineers, because we loved our jobs. We were paid about 2/3 the going wage, and when the company went public, it was explained that we had nothing to do with it. It was all done because the people who raised the money were the ones who built the company. Now that was a losing philosophy, and out of that company in Boston, there sprang 50 venturous companies like mine, and 30 of them survived. The crowd that built that company was pretty terrific. All kinds of companies still exist that fell out of that original transitron, which means that the people who were there were pretty special. They were driven very hard, mostly Europeans. We had to recruit Europeans. We couldn't find hardworking Americans. So I can go on forever about transitron, but it's a little-known story and it's quite interesting. And the secret to inventing then, and it still is to be in the right place at the right time. John and I share an interest in photography. I sense he's more interested than casually, and the secret there is to be in the right place at the right time. And the same is true. You could easily invent transistors back then. You'd have a hard time doing it right now. And you could easily invent .coms last month, and you'll have a hard time 10 years from now. Because there's a certain time at which things get together. We could make silicon. We were tired of tubes. The war was over. The whole bunch of things that all led to why we have transistors. It wasn't magic. Okay, so then, at the time, I knew I was getting bored because I started printmaking, making big black and white prints. And I found that no Americans were in the printmaking competition. They were all Chinese from Hong Kong and other places. So I set out and managed to be the second most exhibited American salon photographer, second only to a Chinaman with 4 more Chinese behind me. So it was kind of fun to be competing with the people in Hong Kong who I'd never been to. And later I went to Hong Kong and they all knew me and we had a great buddy get together, and it was all because we were competing in this weird printmaking thing. So what happens, what it may happen to people, as they kind of lose a little interest in their big deal, they begin to go back to what they liked when they were kids. Then it came time for Telluride, and the thing that I did that I'm probably the proudest of there is that I set up a set of values for the company, a set of what I almost think of as religions. First thing I did was I gave everybody a stock option, and it was an unheard of thing. You just didn't do that, but I did that. How proud I was when I quit that several of our production workers were rich. I mean, they weren't just well off. They did well. They had big fancy cars. I felt so proud that some of our ordinary factory workers really made out. And then I asked myself, what's my job? I'm the boss, and I was a very strong boss. And Alex helped me a great deal, and we split up what we did. But what I did, which was technical, I was absolutely out off Hitler. It was terrible. But among other things, is that I put my employees as my highest priority. The company was there to provide an economic base in Boston, which, by the way, was very depressed at the time. There was no work for ordinary people in Boston. I really wanted to provide jobs for people, and when we provided 2,000 jobs, I was probably prouder of that than all the inventions. We didn't do that easily. We buried 300 competitors. And my partner loved that. Every time we buried another competitor, it was like he had a little bell. Ding! There goes another one. And I thought, oh, heck, those are nice people. We don't have to shoot them. And maybe the second priority, pretty obvious, is your customers. That's easy. And the third priority is the stockholders. And you don't count. I never for an instant cared about me. That's kind of not fashionable these days. But I want to kind of, maybe I'm lecturing a little bit, any of you that are entrepreneuring, for God's sakes, don't think about yourself. Because if you do, you won't build a company. And I really was quite amazed that we succeeded as well as we did. And it turned out very well. I could retire at the age of 40-some, go live in Aspen, where I've been for 30 years, and do what I want to do. But it never occurred to me that that was what I was setting out to do. I was setting out to help people work in a great company and build, amongst the religions, this was a cute one. Our equipment, the reason we succeeded was that I understood what others didn't, that our machinery was a factory machine, not an electronic achievement. And its job, the jobs of the machines were to test transistors in places like Intel, test memory chips. That machine made money for the people who bought it. If I didn't make a machine that made money for them, they shouldn't buy it. And in order to make money, it had to work day after day after day after day. A computer chip is tested in 2.5 seconds. 2.5 seconds, you can't do much to a computer. Christ, forgive the expression, 2.5 seconds is only 1/20th of the way through booting up Windows. It's nothing. But you have to test the whole thing, the whole math unit, everything. It's quite an art to do it. But if you can master that art, the integrated circuit companies are on their knees before you because they have to test their circuits. Only a certain percentage of them work, and a lot of them get trashed and thrown away. And every time you test a circuit, let's say that this is a computer chip. Let's try this one on the latest computer chip. This may be a 2 gigahertz computer, woo-hoo, or maybe it's only 1 gigahertz computer. And this gets $525, and this gets $32. That decision is made by Nick DeWolf in his little machine. So needless to say, we built huge machines. And in the process, I had the nerve to jump the whole company. I took whatever we had built and I said, this is it, we're gambling the company. We're going to build the first computer-operated testers. The computers that we used in these first tests, and it was really a big gamble. Everybody thought we were nuts. We would have definitely sank like a fish if we hadn't made it work. I mean, like a rock. Fish is what we did do. We swam along. We were sick fish. We lived for a while. But the computers were made by girls in Hong Kong or in Taiwan threading magnetic cores for every single bit. So that when you today use your 56K modem, that was 56,000 little iron cores threaded by hand. The computers were made by DEC, and to our stunned amazement, for 4 years we were DEC's biggest customer outside of the military. They made more computers for us to test transistors, the incestuous computers to test computers, to give lectures to computer people endlessly in our little circle. It was quite surprising. We had computers out there years, and I, interestingly enough, was scared to death of software. The computers, by the way, were programmed with paper tape. It was laughable today, but they were very, very effective. We completely conquered the business, took over, and today only have a couple of competitors. As I say, we buried everybody because our machines were flexible and everybody else's machines were soldered shut. I do want to, for you, those of you that are a little techie, one of the machines I built, parenthetically, was not a computer-driven machine. It controlled breweries. And when you have a brewery, if you do it wrong, everybody croaks. So you don't want to do it wrong. And you have to program it to change it. This is malt light, and this is dark Schlitz or something. How the heck did you, in those days, remember the programming? And the only standard way to do it was with toggle switches. Click, 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 click. And this particular machine needed about 350 settings to set up the brewery. So I invented, it was maybe one of the best things I ever invented. It was laughable. And it is the only way I could have done it. I invented the solder glob memory. And if you wanted it to be a 0, you left it alone. And if you wanted it to be a 1, you took a soldering iron and went globe and made a block of solder there. And that was a 1. That was the best memory we've ever used. It was absolutely foolproof, cheap, except you had to program it with a soldering iron. That ran quite a few breweries. So, I mean, that really shows how old I am. That's really, that's like Telluride. So then, as I began, in Teradyne, which is illustrated in that book, we had an internal war. It was never declared as a war. It was kind of like, Vietnam, I guess, was declared as a war. I forgot. It was an undeclared war, but it was there, between the engineers and the business school. And it wasn't as simple as between the engineers and the marketing salespeople. It was between the engineers and the business school. It was two different ways of thinking. And I had done most of the engineering, even most of the circuit designs for the company, and most of the engineers were my people. And the others were their people. And a great mistake was made, is that they and we were both to blame. We put a wall between us. We cut the company in half. There was a technical half and there was the I don't know what you call them, but it was the other half. And we didn't get along. We didn't get along at all. And in fact, I discovered to my horror that we had 9 vice presidents. None of them were engineers. They were all in that camp. We had a board of directors. It was pretty funny. I was the boss, but we had a board of directors who were all bankers and lawyers, and they didn't have the faintest idea what we were going to do. They would not have known how to put the plug in the wall, but they knew how to read the Harvard Business School reports. So that went on, and it saddened me that it had happened. I don't think we even knew how it happened, but it seems to be maybe an inevitable gravity, and hopefully we'll be discussing that. But I grew less and less interested in the company, and then came an honest thing why I had to leave. Nobody knew it but me. The customers wanted bigger machines, bigger, 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 bigger. And in order to build a bigger and bigger machine, there's no way around it, I had to lower the standards. I'd have to start making pretty crummy machines to make huge ones. A little like Windows 2000. It's too big. I had to go and do Windows 2000 to satisfy the market demand, and I refused. I said, no, I won't do that. I'm going to make beautiful small machines that work like a charm instead of a great big lumpy clump. And I was going against what the customers wanted. The company well knew that. I well knew that. And I knew my days were numbered. I still wanted to build the things that I could put my arms around, the things that I could understand, the things that a few people could work on, that we could get. I just didn't want to build a great big committee machines. And it was in the company's best interest to build them. So one afternoon I told Alex, my partner, who, sweet guy, has wanted to be here just to back me up. I said, Alex, it's yours. And he almost died. It took me about a year to plan that, but he couldn't believe it. So I had the great fun of resigning before I got fired. Because eventually I would have been shot for holding the company back to my own more folksy standards. Well, I'd also been 12 years without a vacation. So I found that the engineers, this is kind of interesting, a little tale, the engineers, they were expecting me to come back again and save them because they really lost. When I left, boom, the engineering crew were completely overwhelmed and their corpses were all left on the beach. There was nothing left. The company didn't design anything new for 5 more years. It took 5 years for the next technical thought to arrive. But the company was doing very well. It could just run on inertia, which is exactly what it did do. And they kept it, the engineers were hoping I would come back and save the day. And it turns out I wasn't coming back. And so I had a great idea. I split, leaving my wife and family behind, who were wonderful, and I went to Asia for 6 months, and I took pictures, and I just loved the Orient and the Asian people. And when I came back, they believed that I had died, because I'd been 6 months away. You know, he went, what happened to him? He went off to Thailand or something. So I went off to Thailand or something. And it's not a bad idea. You don't want, the king must die. One of the worst things that ever happened was when Richard Nixon used to live in New York and we were waiting for his next pontification. We really didn't want to hear from him. We'd had enough of Richard Nixon, and they'd had enough of me, and I knew it. So I had the fun of starting a whole new life. And I spent a year as the inventor at large for the company. Almost anybody will tell you that big companies don't invent things. They can't invent things. They can't tolerate inventions. So it was a real bad job. I invented probably 50 or 100 new products for the company. I don't think one of them was ever built, because they don't want inventions. They just want more of what they already got. So I split, came to Aspen, which at that time was something like Telluride, but the dogs weren't as good. The Telluride dogs are world class, and the Aspen dogs were pretty good. I had been previously, by the way, I'm just talking about the crazy things that a person that's free now might do. I ran, this is before I went to Aspen, I ran for the mayor of Beacon Hill, Boston, and I lost, thank God. And I ran on a ticket of running the heroin dealers out of town, which we did. I got deputized as a sheriff of Boston, sheriff of the county up there, and I was actually a narc for a very short period. Maggie and I grew the grass we'd captured in the kitchen so we could do research on it. We had about 15 cats, and I can just tell you, if a marijuana plant in your kitchen does its thing, the cats love it. And the next morning we found 5 cats all rolled over on the floor. But I had my sheriff's cat. So that led me to doing a slideshow about the lifestyles of the Asian people, and it was surprisingly successful in a lot of work. It had 6 slide projectors, it weighed 200 pounds, and I junketed the country showing this thing about Asian people. And as some of you know, I've gotten back into that again in Vietnam. I founded a company, which failed, to bring slideshows to dentist offices because I felt the country wasn't literate anymore and they couldn't even read the National Geographic, not that you ever could read it. So just before you have your tooth pulled, you watch the slideshow, and that was what I was going to sort of supper it, whatever you call it. I was going to narcotize the poor people having their tooth pulled. Business didn't work, but it would be an excuse for me to make slideshows. So in Aspen, I made a slide factory, and I set out to be able to build 1 million slides a year in my back house by mechanizing everything. Then I wound up organizing the first and last really big Aspen Arts Festival. We had, in a town of 5,000 people, we had 2,000 people performing something. Every single person in town had better get in the art festival. We don't want to hear from you. And the best thing was the gong show. The gong show was outstanding. We had a gong show that was a real world-class gong show. So that got me involved, and you get to know a community if you do things like that. Then I went to the Sudan and Africa as the technical director or person in a retrace of the rescue of China Gordon. China Gordon was a crazy guy that staggered across the desert, and I was the guy with mine detectors to dig up corpses, which we did, naughtily. And we found that the records of China Gordon in Africa were exactly correct. The non-illustrated Times had done it right. But we checked up everything. And it was quite fascinating, and that led me to Ethiopia, where I photographed the tribes in Ethiopia for the Ethiopian government. Very risky because it was communist. And I managed to pull that one off and get home again. Probably the riskiest thing I ever did. I think I had less than a 50% chance of getting home because Ethiopia is a rough place and life is cheap. Then we founded the Aspen Computer Society, one of the world's first computer societies. It was based on computers we had kids build, which were, John may remember, Digital Group, back Altair Digital Group out of Denver. And you built it yourself, you soldered everything yourself. And it was a fine CPM machine. So that's where we got our start. One thing all of you should know if you ever get an old computer, if you ever play the simulation game of Kingdom, they have the right idea. In order to win, You sell the land and starve the peasants. So that's the SimCity secret. Then we founded the Aspen Rocket Society, and we used to have kids shooting rockets in the air. I then did probably the very best thing I've ever done. And it's an icon, and that's the dancing fountain in Aspen. There's a fountain in Aspen that dances up and down, and the kids play in it, and the dogs play in it. And just yesterday, they took a picture of me for this event, and I played in it. I got an umbrella, and I stood in the fountain saying, this will keep me dry. Well, the fountain comes up from below. So the umbrella was a great invention to stay dry in the fountain. The fountain is carefully designed so that it is very orderly. It's like music. It's not random. On the other hand, if you watch it for 5 minutes and you memorize carefully what happened in those 5 minutes, it won't repeat until 4 times the length of time for the sun to supernova. So you ain't going to see the same thing twice, but you can set your watch by it. Every hour, for a few seconds, it tells the time. And we're going to hear about time. We'll have to set some new kind of time, and I promise I'll help. Then I spent a year as the chief engineer of the Blue Cactus Mining Company. And one of the arguments we're going to have at this festival, I'm sure a lot, is what makes us invent, what drives us? Is it money? Well, this sure was money, but it wasn't really money. It was a gas. We had the rights to almost all of Nevada's sand. And there is gold everywhere. There's gold in seawater. So I was the chief engineer and designed this wildcat scheme, very dangerous, very poisonous, very cyanide-y, ooh la la, to extract the gold. And the great reason I was so excited about the project was that you don't have to market gold. If you can go and dig and get some gold, you don't have to have a marketing department, you don't need a B school, you just go to the bank. The whole idea of having a company which turns right into dough was very appealing to me. And secondly, we thought we had so much gold, it was quite embarrassing. We were going to actually topple the price of gold if we had stored, and the Australians would go bankrupt. We had more gold than Australia, we thought. Well, it took a long time, a lot of work, and our denouement came in Canada in a nuclear pile, a nuclear power plant, a nuclear pile. Some samples of our stuff in Dixie cups went through the nuclear pile. And it turns out gold really, doing, emits again if it's been nucleated just right. The gold went through, and it came out, and there wasn't any boodle. In fact, we didn't have 5 times more gold than seawater. We had 5 times less gold than seawater. So that was the end of the Blue Cactus Mining Company. But it was such an exciting chapter that of all the movies, we all want to make a movie of something in our lives. That's the thing I want to make a movie of. It was full of characters that were out of, unbelievable, and Las Vegas was involved in it. Then I joined, and this was a wonderful thing, it still stands very strongly with me. I joined the Aspen Center for Physics, which is a serious outfit, as the local, to protect them from local political manipulations. And I grew to really enjoy the people I was supposed to be, which was a physicist. I was meant to be a physicist, but I didn't do that. The thing about physicists, and we've invited a physicist, Rolf is here, hopefully. There's a funny thing I just noticed at Snowmass last week. They really like what they do. In general, of course, exceptions, but physicists love it. They get a great kick out of it, and they never think about any of the dot-com type talk. They have to raise money, huge amounts of it, to do what they want to do. But they are not driven by the same devils that you think inventors and engineers are driven by. And yet there's plenty of engineers involved in it. Then came a period when I designed, and I think John will appreciate this, I claim to have designed, and I did all the circuit layout, the circuit boards, the whole thing, the absolutely finest CPM machine ever designed by an order of magnitude. It was called the ON computer. That's because it didn't have an off switch. Once you turned it on and booted it up, you left it there. It had no moving parts. We built about 100 of them. It failed because we got steamrollered by IBM, and I'll explain that. Most of those were running 5 years later without being rebooted. And the memory chips, against all common sense, were dynamic memory chips. I had mastered the art of keeping the juice on. The power supply is the heart of such a scheme. Now, I made a little note here, I think, about what that thing did. Oh boy, I really missed an awful lot. Just as well, and you'll all be sound asleep if we tell you everything, just to be too much. But This machine ran WordStar, DBase, SuperCalc, and Business Basic. And it did, in essence, everything an ordinary office would do. It would start up from a cold scratch to do anything you wanted to do in 1/3 of a second. It would file the work you'd spent the whole day working on in 1/50th of a second. It ran on 64K of memory. The total storage was 4 megabytes, and the computer was a 4 megahertz computer. In other words, today's computer eats 2,000 times more memory, 4,000 times more mass storage. It has a computer chip that runs 500 times faster. But under Bill Gates' bloat, it runs a lot slower than the on-computer ran. It doesn't, however, play Air Flight Simulator. Once again, that's what sank me. The measure of a computer was if it would play Air Flight Simulator. And I couldn't play Air Flight Simulator, not even close. So I went under. And believe it or not, that was the test. If you remember, John, if you didn't do Air Flight Simulator, you weren't a real computer. Namely, color graphics. So that was very exciting, and it crashed. And what I kind of began to realize is that if you quit ahead, which I had, you can take on ridiculous projects that nobody in their right mind would take on, and they don't particularly succeed. So this dream that you go find a successful entrepreneur and he will be successful once again. But you may forget that the successful entrepreneur, if he's like me, will take much bigger chances on the second go around because I'm already secure. Thus, all the things that I've done since then were vastly riskier, and most of them failed. I'd say the odds of an ex-entrepreneur failing are probably greater than the odds of a new entrepreneur failing, if you understand me, guys. Although the celebrity system says if you're a winner, boy, everybody wants a piece of him. But look out for winners, because they do strange things. Then I started a project called CyberPower, and it was a really sad thing because I worked so hard at it, was to bring good computer programs like Carmen Sandiego to kids. The schools were out of it, they still are out of it, but I was way, way too far ahead of myself. And what I did was, this is speechy here, but blunted by inertia and fear in the school systems, I had this brilliant idea. I bailed out of the school systems. The hell with them. I'm not going to try to reform the school system or their labor union. And I set up shop in malls, in stores in malls. And in the storefront in malls would be a sort of an arcade, but there was no shooting down of anything. It was called what we call guerrilla learning. And probably what motivated me more than anything was to get the kids that are illiterate, there's plenty of them that are borderline illiterate, but even their parents don't know it, to get them so curious that some of them would start to learn to read. And we had some success with that. And I had, because we're going to be talking again about what happens to inventors and entrepreneurs, I had in the back of my mind a really revolting plan. It was acceptable to me. I was definitely going to sell it. As soon as I proved it would work, I couldn't stand being at retail in market malls. It's a really rough, horrible place to be. So I had my customer in mind. He doesn't know it to this day, but if I'd made it succeed, I think I could have sold it to Blockbuster Video. That guy really knows about how to handle sleazy mall situations and how to build cheap buildings and how to get space and how to wrestle with the mall owners and everything. And it was sort of in keeping. So I was going to sell it to that, I don't remember his name, but I was going to sell it to somebody who knows how to handle that rubber to the road place. Please don't go into heavy duty retail unless you're prepared for a lot of punching out. Your employees will steal from you. I don't want to go into all the horrors of it, but it's horrible. Then Harvey, who's here, Harvey is the son. Anyway, Harvey's a very Telluride guy, most of you know him. He connected me up with the Hackers Club, and through that I met all kinds of strange people, including quite a few of those present. And there is a strange sort of a tie of the people's present. It's sort of Hackers Club, and it isn't really, except we sort of know each other. And so a lot of the people here are sort of members of a circle, and I'm trying to help us break out of that circle, break into other circles as well. Because you do have a small group in any field that all know each other. That's a good thing, but not 100%. Then I started with another guy, Web Connects, which is an ISP in Boulder, and through that I learned a great deal about what ISPs are, and John well knows, the Boardwatch guy, John writes for Boardwatch, Jack Rickard was very encouraging that small ISPs can exist on the basis of what they provide, and I'm right in the middle of exactly what Jack Rickard's dream was. I'm not too sure it's working very well, but I do run a small ISP along with another guy. I then got back into politics. Hang in, I'm getting close to the end. All right. I got involved in a committee that designed the statement of purpose for the town of Aspen. And it was in total violation of what the government wanted. But it had government approval. Fascinating challenge. 30 of us drafted what we wanted the town to be and told the government what we wanted it to be. However, we all laughed it up our sleeves because we knew the government could never do what we wanted it to be. But it had to do with character, and so we're known as the drafters of the character statement. And I recommend that all towns, especially Telluride, somehow draft a statement of purpose for the town rather than just perpetuate the government as a purpose for the town. Then I was not struck, but I discovered that I had prostate cancer. And through physics connections, really as much as anything, I went off to get treated in the world's most fabulous thing, a proton accelerator, which zaps you with protons. And it does the same thing X-rays do, but it does it more gently to you. And I realized that nobody knew about it. So I set up a website for them, and it's probably the best website I'll ever set up. It brings a third of their patients. Because people don't want to hear from doctors. Doctors are in business. They want to hear from patients, and patients aren't heard from. So if any of you ever run across an old geezer, meaning a guy about 45, who's sort of crossed his legs and doesn't want to talk about it, send him to www.protons.com. And he'll learn about a great way to get rid of that problem. Then I got interested in Vietnam, and there's some artifacts of that here. And to Vietnam today, and I'm back in the business of doing photographs again. I'm doing portal sites. I've got more projects than I can stand, and I've got more pontifical advice than I can stand, but I think I've probably talked long enough, except to say maybe one generality to those of you that want to entrepreneur. Be honest. Tell the truth. That's the principle. That's the most important principle, and that makes you into a good businessman. So enough of that. Should we take a little break, because I get to award John the award after all this bullshit. Would you like to just go on, or shall we?
Go on.
Sure. Okay. Well, it was sort of kooky, because I thought I was just going to give an award. So getting one is a shock. And who the hell do I give the Nick DeWolf award to? And what do I give it to him for? So then I tried the analytical deal, and I made spreadsheets about what awards are for and stuff. And that was no good. And then I thought about who do I really respect? Who do I really respect? And it's Winston Churchill. Shit, he's not around. So, why do I respect somebody? So I did think of some other people who were sort of a little bit like me, inventors or something, or people who built companies and stuff like that. And haunting me in the back of my mind has been a guy I've respected ever since I first met him, before I met him, which we figured must have been 10 years ago, and that's John Dvorak. John, who I know very little about, and his bios on the internet, there's very slim little things. Says he writes for a lot of magazines. Boy, does he ever. This guy, John, must use more ink than Carter's has, more ink than Carter's has pills. He writes and writes and writes. But the reason I so respect John, and once again, I'm not, I really do believe, forgive me, but I think most people are the same. I think everybody in this room is pretty much the same. There's differences, but there's no such thing as an extraterrestrial creature, although we would wish it. But there are some people that just have standards and they stick by them. And John tells the truth. John, in his writings, when he likes something, he's known as a curmudgeon who says "humph" to everything. But when he likes something, he says so. He likes it. And he used to cruise through trade shows looking for the two kids at a card table with a thingy on the table. And sometimes the thingy on the table was really terrific. John is probably the best at that of anybody I know. I used to pride myself on finding thingies at the card table department in the back of the trade show. John has the wisdom, the knowledge, and also he uses this stuff. He's not pontificating about something some marketing guy's given him. And he tells it like it is to him. And I have found that probably, I'd say 90% of what John's views are. And they're rather strong, but I am in total tune with them. And only 10% of them are totally ridiculous, but that's a very small percentage for a guy who speaks out. I'm wrong 36% of the time. He's wrong only 10% of the time. So we were talking, Doug Wolfgram helped me get to know him, and we managed to sneak into John's parties, which were terrific. And at John's parties, there was no deal making. Nobody sat around offering discounts. It was a bunch of long-haired, crazy guys with glasses on that were all saying, how about, gee, and have you tried this and that? So John had always attracted the technical type guys, even though he was mostly bombarded by the marketing type guys. I can only say that I immensely respect John C. Dvorak. There's several John Dvoraks I learned today for his straightforwardness, his honesty, and his real help to us techies by helping us see through the muddy, I wrote some bullshit, but I'm better off just winging it this way. He's helped us see our way through sort of the muddy miasma of what all of this computer stuff has been. And he's definitely influenced a lot of my thinking. So, having said that, I would like to present the Big DeWolf Award to John C. Dvorak. For looks like 7 years or something, John ran the John Dvorak Award on the internet.
I'll bring it back.
It was fabulous. On the website, it's a great big mound of paper here. He awarded the John Dvorak Award to a whole bunch of really great people. It was a lot of work, 18-page website. So it turns out the Nick DeWolf Award goes to the John Dvorak Award, which is another. Look out, this whole thing's going to circle around. There's only going to be 6 of us just swapping
Giving us
awards.
awards.
Award circle.
That's just so unethical. How could you have a company, how do you expect to get, assuming that the writer is even remotely honest, I don't have a problem with it. But if you assume the writer's crooked, and you're gonna have the company pay him for him to go to wherever, Asia, let's say Hong Kong, yeah, sure, maybe there's a problem. Maybe you should reanalyze the writer rather than analyze the situation. The reason that large publishing companies and these ethical considerations are always dominated by some big corporate large publishing company. New York Times comes to mind. This is where I get in arguments with New York Times people about this all the time.